Welcome to Inspired Change, a new inspirational and motivational broadcast that strives to empower men in a positive way, designed to educate, empower, and inspire even the busiest individual on the go over that first cup of coffee. Please join me in welcoming Gunter, international psychologist, author, speaker, and producer.
Hello, welcome back to another episode of Inspired Change. So, again, I'm flying solo. That's okay. I don't mind doing that, although it's always fun to have someone else with me or a number of people with me. So, in this particular podcast, one of the things I want to do is move on a little bit from the whole critical thinking stuff. Now, the reason is not that it's critical thinking isn't important. It's just that I want to start working with you guys, the audience, on reflecting on the importance of the emotional experience as much as the intellectual, the cognitive experience, because ultimately the two need to be sort of well aligned if we're going to actually really grow as a human being. So this last weekend I had the wonderful experience of me and my wife going and seeing my daughter and her husband and our two grandsons. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because, firstly, I want to talk about development, how we develop as human beings. And specifically in today's episode, I want to talk about the importance of empathy. Okay? And so you're probably wondering, okay, where's he going with this in terms of grandchildren? And so I'm going to put it very simply. We can learn an enormous amount about human behaviour, human functioning by watching children, and children of all ages, so from 0 onwards. Now, what we technically should be seeing in that process is a process of socialisation and social development, as much as we should be seeing behavioural development, i.e. their conduct should be improving. Anyone who's spent any time with a terrible two or a 3-year-old who's a tiny terrorist will know exactly what I'm talking about. Okay? So, and we continue with that observation. So here we are, we love going down seeing our grandkids and spending time with them. And my daughter had introduced a very interesting book that when we arrived, both the boys, who are 5 and 3.5, were busting to hear. And the book is called Have You Filled a Bucket Today? The author is Carol McLeod, also known as the Bucket Lady. And essentially, the book is a very simple metaphor of a bucket and a dipper. And that is that when we choose to be kind, we're not only just filling the buckets of those around us, but we're also filling our own bucket. And so, on the other hand, when we choose to say or do mean things, we're dipping into buckets. And I sat there and I watched the boys totally absorbed in this story. And immediately after, they began using, with their parents, and ultimately we came to the party with it as well, the language in the book, i.e. when they were doing mean things, we would remind them, that they were being a bucket dipper. And we said, isn't it better to fill someone else's bucket, because then you'll feel good about yourself as well. So the reason that I'm bringing this up is because the second part of this podcast that I really want to focus on is empathy, okay? The subtitle of Have You Filled a Bucket Today is a guide to daily happiness for kids. Now, all of you have heard me talk about, that the search for happiness can actually, ultimately result just in more unhappiness. And so I appreciate the subtitle of the book, but one of the key things that I see emerging with that approach to teaching kids about filling and emptying buckets is that it requires a core element, and that element is empathy. Now, kids and teenagers are generally renowned for not exactly being high on the empathy scale. In fact, far from it. In particular, when I work with a lot of teenagers, some of the teenagers, I've got to get out of the headspace that it's all about me, that actually their behaviour has some pretty significant impacts on other people, and that the way they go about it might actually make other people feel really bad. And for some teenagers, that's a real wake-up call. They hadn't thought about it like that. But the same applies to 3, 4, 5-year-olds and so on. So I want us to be really clear that empathy is not an innate characteristic that we're born with inherently. It actually needs to be socialised. Now, having said that, there is very clear evidence that by and large most children tend to be more cooperative than they are competitive. So lots of kids will help each other and focus on sharing with another child if that child doesn't have. But one thing that often happens is that, and I watch this with, my grandsons, is they often get into this power struggle about something, and then, if you're not careful, all hell breaks loose. So, the 3.5-year-old starts screaming, the 5-year-old starts negotiating, but it's not going anywhere because the emotions are too high, and subsequently both of them are locked into their own position and they're not actually thinking about what's going on. They're just too emotional at that point. So one of the key points that I want to make in this podcast is, firstly, empathy can be taught. We learn empathy and the degrees of empathy. And this particular book with the buckets is just such a tool to help children learn a fundamental behaviour that leads to empathy. Because in order to fill someone else's bucket, you need to, first of all, recognise that the other person's got a bucket, and how do I fill that, and what makes that filling for the other person. So, pardon on words. Okay, so there's both a cognitive process that the child needs to engage in, but also an emotional process. And one of those processes is about recognising the nature of the other, and the other part of it is recognising what's going on for me, i.e., do I realise that when I do something nice for somebody else, that I'm actually going to feel good about that, that I get something out of this as well. And there's been lots of debates about whether, if we use the term altruism, i.e. my thoughts about the well-being of others, is actually selfless, or is it a selfish process? Now, I'm not going to get into that particular area right now, because my focus, my key message in this is that I want us to be very, very, very clear with our children, with our partners, with our families, that we're going to exercise empathy as part of our relationship. We're going to be as concerned for each other's emotional well-being as we are about our behaviour and our, thinking, our cognitive experience of the other. So let me bring it into the context of masculinity. And one of the things that I've argued time and time again is that patriarchy as an ideology reduces firstly, a man's emotional vocabulary and recognition of those feelings, but it also reduces empathy, and it's an ongoing process. So for a lot of men, especially in their late teens, early 20s, 30s, there needs to be a process wherein we can help men to step up their empathic experience. Part of the reason, and I'm going to put the pointy end forward, is that patriarchy makes most of us as men narcissistic. Now, it varies in degrees, but all of us have a streak to it. For example, if I clean the house, expecting that my partner is going to come and pat me on the back and, shower me with gratitude, then I'm not doing it for myself. I'm actually doing it out of a narcissistic place. That is, I need to get recognition for it. Otherwise, cleaning the house doesn't count. Under normal circumstances, I should clean the house because I live here, right? So it's partly my responsibility as well. So, no, I'm not helping my wife clean the house. I'm cleaning my house. So if we want to really improve that whole sense of having a more sounder society, a society that's kinder, more empathic, then what we need to do is we need to start improving especially men's emotional awareness, as well as their ability to empathise with others, as well as being able to express that. So here's my point. Any discussion examining the issue of masculinity that does not include a reflection on the importance of empathy in the evolution of men is missing the point entirely. Growing emphasis has to be placed on educating young children to be more empathic, to think about the other more. But often we make the assumption that it's something that just sort of that we're born with and it's just there or not. And again, I disagree with that. We can teach this. And watching my grandsons over the weekend was a very, very good lesson in that point. So let me start off then, and I'll be doing a few more podcasts around similar theme, with a challenge to everybody out there. So where can we start with this whole process of learning better empathy? There's a book out there by an author, Roman Krznaric, called Empathy, Why It Matters and How to Get It. And he talks about 6 habits of highly empathic people. Now, I want you to think about practicing these habits, okay? So it's a challenge, it's some homework. So the first habit is to cultivate curiosity about strangers. So remember, the moment we start thinking about what might be going on for somebody else, that begins the process. We become curious about the other person. We start to see things perhaps through their filter. Habit 2, challenge prejudices and discover commonalities. As I talk about in Making Good Men Great, human beings are more similar than they are different. Even skin colour is superficial. Habit 3, try another person's life. Now, a lot of times that's harder to do because, we can't just sort of go, oh, look, this week I'm going to be a baker or a butcher or a doctor, okay? But we can certainly imagine ourselves in that person's shoes. The 4th habit is about listening hard and opening up. That relationship between listening, really, really, really listening, and then expressing ourselves without defences is very, very important. Habit 5, inspire mass action and social change. And this is very dear to my heart because inspire change with me is very much about our individual evolution to inspire social change. And that requires mass action. And habit 6 that he talks about is to develop an ambitious imagination. So what I want everybody who's listening to this podcast to do is to go to the article, find it, Google, Roman Krzanik, which is Krznaric. And my apologies to Roman if I've completely stuffed up the pronunciation of his name, which for someone with my surname should actually be pretty straightforward, but it isn't. Have a look at that. Google his book. Get the book. Secondly, try the habits for 30 days. Think about all the different walks of your life in which you can introduce those habits. And the third thing is think about if you are a male, if you're a man, how you can leverage this with other men and then become part of making good men great. And on that note, till next time, I'm signing off.
Thank you, Gunter. And thank you for listening to Inspire Change with Gunter. Again, if you have any questions or comments or ideas for a show, you can email development@noirtainment.com. That's development@noirtainment.com. Thank you, and thank you for listening.